Hello, tiny friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Pet Cemetery. Yes, it is time to get back to this project. I'm super excited because I've been away from it for a while. And I know some of you are super excited to get back to it as well. So if you're new here today, welcome to Tiny Keyhole Minis. I'm Jolene, and this is the recreation of Stephen King's Pet Cemetery. When I left off last, I created the Ludlow Town sign, which is seen in the 2023 Pet Cemetery prequel Bloodlines. And then I also added the Derry Town marker sign, which is seen in the 2019 remake version of the original. Now, Stephen King's birth date is September 21st, so I decided to celebrate all month long with episodes of the Pet Cemetery. I don't know how many episodes I'll be able to get in 1 month, but I'm going to focus on this project alone. I have been a Stephen King fan since I was a little girl. I was raised on horror movies. I don't recommend that. I did not do that to my kids. Well, I did. I did do that to my kids. I did not do that to my grandkids. I will not do that to my grandkids. But I thought it was perfectly okay. So I raised my kids, but I was still young as well. And now that I am pushing 50, I don't recommend that at all. And when I hit when I hit my 40s, I did not recommend that. Um, but it was a different time back then in the 70s and 80s. And I guess, the adults in my family thought that that was perfectly okay. So I have been a Stephen King fan since I was a child. And I just I just love horror films. So that is one of the reasons why I have chosen to recreate the Pet Cemetery. It's one of my favorite Stephen King novels. Now, I'm going to be coming back to this project with making some trees. And I have not been excited about this. I have kind of been dreading it. I've never made trees before. And I just wasn't very thrilled about doing this. So, to prevent myself from disliking the process of making trees or getting burnt out, I decided to try different techniques. And this way, I'll have different style trees in my project, which I do want. And it will also keep me from disliking this process of making trees. It'll be more fun for me. I can switch up techniques, try different things, and see what works, see how they look, and we'll see what happens. Now, I'm not going to be able to make all the trees for the diorama in one setting or one video, so I'll be splitting that up and making trees throughout the project. Today, I'm going to begin with these greenery picks. And I purchased a bunch of different greenery picks from Temu. They have like a two-tone green on them, and I like the style of the tree. I don't like that they're flat on one side. I do like that the branches do have textures on them, but you're really not going to see much of the branches the way I'm going to create these trees. But I did think it was kind of a cool idea, and it was super easy and fun and neat and different. And I think it's going to work out. So I'm going to show you how I do that. I also have a few different other types. I think I purchased like 3 different types. Now with this one, I'm able to make 3 trees. I haven't really started working with the other stuff yet, but we're going to get there. So it is time to make some trees. I'm going to show you a quick recap of what I've done to the project, what I did last. So if you're just tuning into this project and you want to catch up, I will link the playlist in the description box below. I think there's like 5 or 6 episodes, and you can see how I got to this point if you have not seen that yet. So, with all that said, let's get started. Let's make some trees. Get it over with. Okay, tiny friends. So, a quick recap, and I did do some work to all of the edges around the whole frame. The first layer of bud that I laid down had shrunk and exposed the foam board that I used and the clay that I made. So, if you remember last, you were able to see that there was like a big gap there. So, I filled that in and I just used some white PVA glue or Elmer's school glue and a little bit of water and coffee. I didn't need much and it worked out really well. So I'll eventually go back in around this dirt and add some grass and some more greenery to that as well. But I wanted to get that over with so that I can carry on with the project. I'm still working on the front section. This is the sign that I made last. And my goal is to be completely done with the front section by the end of this month. So I'm going to be finishing up the front section. I also added a little bit of greenery to the bottom of the mile marker sign for dairy. And I did give the sign a couple coats of satin varnish by Duraclear just to protect it because I had forgotten to do that. I did have a couple ideas to add to the sign. So I think I'm going to try to add one more detail to the dairy sign. My goal is to have this front section completed, which it almost is. I do have a lot of landscaping to do, a lot of greenery to lay down. But for the most part, all the big pieces are down. And when I return to this project after this month, I can begin creating the cemetery, which will be the midsection of this project. So that is my goal. Finish this front entrance. Okay, let's make some trees. Now, I really didn't know what exactly I was going to do with these. And I just started playing around, coming up with some ways that I can put these together to create one single tree. And I came up with using 3 pieces. So I can get 3 trees. I have 10 picks. And I think with the last one, I think I'm just going to cut it down and break it up and make some bushes. So we'll see how that goes. But I decided if I put these 2 together, like a triangle shape, I can add this 3rd one in to fill in that space and make a whole tree with that. So yeah, I'm going to give it a try and trust the process here, tiny friends. Okay, the first thing I need to do is figure out how to attach these 2 pieces together before I add the 3rd piece. And I thought it would be best to use a piece of wire. So I have this paper covered greenery wire, and I am just going to give it a head start by curling the end so it can just kind of hook onto this. I'm hooking it right to the main trunk, so the mid section. It's not attached to any of the branches that are going outward. It's right on the middle one, right on the main one. So it's not wrapped completely around, but it's just kind of tightened up on that branch. I'm going to add the second one. I'm going to bring it to this side and kind of just slide that piece of wire right into the same area on this second branch. This way they can all line up together. I'm making sure that my tops and the bottoms are lined up. And I'm just going to wrap this wire around the 2 pieces. About 2 times is all it really needs. So I'm going to give it a nice tight wrap so that it doesn't go anywhere. And it's a little awkward. It's kind of a little difficult trying to find placement for my fingers, but it is not impossible. So I'm just wrapping it around about 2 times. That's all it needs. I'm just giving it a little added security. I am going to add some hot glue as well. So I'm just pulling it and making sure that it's nice and tight. So already this is nice and snug. The two pieces are nice and tight together, and I'm just adjusting it. I want to make sure before I actually add the glue that they're laying right where I want them to. But it's pretty snug as is, but I need to give it that extra security. So I'm going to go in with some hot glue. I'm just kind of opening it up a little more because I do have that third one to fit into place. And I'm just making the adjustments to lay them exactly where I want them to stay. So when I add the glue, that's where they'll be. So I'm going to begin with adding glue on the bottom half first. So I'm going from the wire down the bottom, and I'm adding the glue right in the middle where the two pieces connect. And then I'm just going to hold them together for a couple seconds until the glue takes hold and cools down just a little bit. And now I'm going to do the same thing from the top half. I'm going to go from the top of the wire all the way upward. Once I get it where I want it to be or where I'm holding it in a more comfortable position, I'll just take my hot glue, going from the wire down towards the top of the tree, right in the middle. This will fuse these two pieces together, lock them in nice and tight, and I can go ahead and add the third branch. So I just want to make sure that the tops are lined up. And I'm going to check the bottoms to make sure that they line up. I'm just going in the top part first from the wire all the way up. In the same area right in the middle where I just added the glue. And now I'm just going to squeeze these trees together. So I'm going to push that third branch in, make sure it's touching, and just kind of hold them into place. And tiny friends, this really does work out. It really does. So if you're in need of making trees, you can go ahead and give this a try. It's pretty simple. So for the bottom, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to go in, kind of like squeeze my gun right in between and glue from the bottom wire down. And here you can see where I have the branches wrapped. I'm going to go ahead and wrap that third branch in. So you can see that third branch doesn't have a wire around it. I'm just going to pull the wire right over that and give it a couple wraps. Again, just like 2 wraps, nice and tight. Once I have this tree wrapped and secured, I'm going to clip off that excess, and I am going to use it. I'm going to use this piece. Right now, I'm just squeezing that end tight so it's not sticking out where it could poke me later on. So if you're doing something like this, make sure to close your ends. Just give them a nice squeeze so that they can tighten up around the piece you're wrapping. This piece fell off, so I'm going to try and find where it belongs. And I'm just picking off any excess globs of glue that I can see. The glue is clear, so it's not all that visible, but I don't want any to remain behind. Now, I could not find for the life of me where this little piece came off of. So what I decided to do was just add some glue in the area where I have wrapped the branches. And I'm just going to stick this piece right in there so that it can kind of camouflage where I wrapped. You won't really see the wire. It worked out really well, but I did spend a good amount of time trying to find out where that came from. Okay, so I'm going to take that extra piece of wire. I'm going to give it a head start. Just hook it around the bottom, nice and tight. And then I'm going to wrap it upwards up to the part where the tree trunk starts to thicken. So I'm just covering the pick parts of these 3 branches. I've got one more tree to make, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to jump to the next step so you can see where I go from here. Okay, to make this tree look like a tree, I need to give it a tree trunk. And I decided to use paper clay. This is the first time that I'm using paper clay. I usually use air dry clay, and I really wanted to see what the difference was. Since they are both air dry clays, I wasn't really sure. So I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity to use the paper clay. Either one will work. And I'm just taking a small amount and just working it a little bit. I'm going to dip my fingers in the water just to give it a little bit of moisture. And this will help soften it up a little more and make it a little easier to work with. You can see how much I'm using, not very much, and I'm just flattening it down just a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're going to see I'm not trying to make this perfectly even or smooth around the edges. I'm just flattening it down just a little bit because I'm going to work it out. There's been many times where I have added glue to attach air dry clay to pieces, and I was wondering if I should do that with these trees, but I did not. I just went ahead and started applying it to the trees. What I'm doing is just squeezing it nice and tight up on the top, just making sure that it's nicely attached. And I'm going to do the same thing around the bottoms when I get towards the bottom. So I'm just squeezing the amount of clay and I'm kind of working it downward. This is so simple and so stress-free. You do not need to be perfect. Tree trunks are not very straight. They have lumps and bumps and knots and all kinds of different shapes. So this is the perfect time to just give your little trees some characters. Everyone is going to look a little different when you're doing this. And you can see at the bottom, I've left a little bit of the pick uncovered by the clay because that's going to be inserted into the base, into the ground of the project where I can glue it into place. So my main focus is just trying to get the top and the bottom nice and tight so those pieces aren't loose. The clay's not loose. It's tightly wrapped around the branches so that it won't break off later on. So I'm doing the same thing with the bottom. I'm just squeezing it so that it's nice and tight, kind of making sure that it's just attached very well. I'm not really worried about the bottoms being perfect or looking a certain way because I'm going to add greenery and grass and different pieces to the bottoms to kind of cover that up. So next I'm going to go in with some water and I'm just rubbing the clay with wet fingers just to rub out any of the cracks. I don't mind textures being left behind or the lumps from my fingers squeezing it, but I don't want any cracks in the bark. So I'm just making sure that all of that is nice and smoothed down and pressed nice and tight to the branches. And I'm also doing the same thing, adding a little bit of water to the top just to smooth it down, kind of blend it in a little more. Okay, I'm going to speed this up, but you can see that I am thoroughly going over the whole trunk with the water, just smoothing it all down. I did take my time and I did double check about 2 or 3 times just to be on the safe side because I don't want any cracks in the clay. I would say if you want to try making trees this way, when you get to this step, to definitely take your time and double check just to be sure. Alrighty, the next step is to create some textures in the bark. So I am just taking this sculpting tool and just making some lines. I'm just scratching in some lines. They're not straight. I am intentionally making wavy lines and I'm just going in and not even thinking about it. This is going to give the tree some realism and the clay will begin to kind of bump up and cause these little rough, fuzzy things. I call it clay fuzz because it kind of looks like when fleece gets washed too many times, it creates these little beads of fabric. That's what the clay is going to do. But don't worry about that. I'm going to show you what to do with that when the clay is dried. So Don't try to take it off now. Just let them remain as is. Go ahead and give your tree trunk that texture that it needs. Okay, with this tree, I decided to add a little more detail. So I am creating some knots with knot holes, and also I'm going to carve in an Easter egg. So right now I'm just flattening out a space where you would see a flat space in the tree trunk and somebody would carve their initials. I am going around the knot holes, kind of just following the shape. So kind of like a circular shape to create some lines that flow with the shape of the knot holes. But I'm just going to build up this little space and begin to add some initials. These initials are going to be VP for Victor Pascal. If you're not familiar with the movie, Dr. Lewis Creed, the husband in the house, started a new job at a college, and Victor Pascal was one of the students. On the doc's first day at the job, Victor was hit by a Mack truck and brought in by the other students. While the doctor was trying to help him, is when he met his fate. So he comes back in several scenes of the movie to warn the doc about the entity beyond the barrier of the pet cemetery, and he tries to help the family from meeting their own fate, sort of say. So I thought this would be a great place to add his initials as if he has been here all along. I'm going to go ahead and let these dry overnight. So I'm just going to set them in front of my little fan so that they can dry thoroughly and come back to them the next day. If you don't want to wait that long, set them in front of a fan, come back to them in a couple hours. A good way to tell if your clay is fully dry is when it is no longer cold. So just wrap your fingers around it, give it a little kind of a firm hold. Don't squeeze it to break it, but if you don't feel any coldness in it, it's usually completely dried. If you feel some sort of cold in your clay, then there's a good chance it's still wet inside. Okay, it is the next day and my clay is dried. I'm just going to take my fingers and rub off any of the loose clay beads that I can get off. But I'm going to take a very fine piece of sandpaper. It's very thin, very fine, and I'm just going to lightly sand off these little beads. Now I'm not sanding very hard. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it because I don't want to sand away the texture that I added, but this works out perfectly to remove any of those rough edges that occurred when I was adding the texture. So it just takes a tiny little bit of sanding, a very fine piece of sandpaper, and all of those little clay beads and rough edges disappear. And it just gives it a smoother surface for painting. I'm going to give my trees a base coat of black acrylic, and I'm using a good amount because any type of air dry clay just soaks that paint right up. And when the paint dries, you will see tiny little white specks. Now, even when you think that you have thoroughly covered it and you can't notice it when it's wet, so it has to be completely dry. And it's not your painting, so don't think it's your painting. It happens all the time with an air dry clay. So I'm using a good amount, and I like to go in one direction and then go over it in the opposite direction to try and get in all those nooks and crannies. But it's what it does. So you definitely want to take your time and thoroughly check. It takes about 2 or 3 layers. I'm also going up a little bit on the branches just to kind of blend this in where those bottom branches are. I will be going over the black with other colors. I don't want those white specks to show through because they stick out like sore thumbs. So apply a good amount and just give it 2 or 3 layers. After this first layer dries, I'll go in and just kind of cover up any of the white specks that I see. And you really just got to look at your piece in every angle possible, because when you're looking at it from one angle, you won't notice them, but when you turn it or when you flip it upside down, you'll see where they are. So just give it a thorough check. This looks pretty good, but there are a few more areas that I would like to cover. So I'm going to do that and come back to it. Now that that's taken care of, I'm going to go in with some brown. And I realized I am all out of brown. So I'm using my Waverly Chalk brown, which is called Truffle. And I am just dry brushing very, very lightly on here. So I don't have much on my brush. I don't want to cover up that black completely because I want that to be in all my little lines and textured areas. But I am also going up on the tree branches where I painted that black. You definitely do not want to go heavy on the dry brushing. I'm going very lightly on this. And I like to start at the very bottom just in case I have too much paint on my brush. I'm not just jumping in and beginning in the middle or something where it would be very noticeable. And then if you want to apply a little more, go ahead and apply more. It's easier to add more than to take away. So begin lightly and just go from there on how you want your piece to look. Once I'm done with this brown and it's nice and dry, I'm going to go in with some highlighting. Now you can choose several different colors for your highlighting. I'm going to go with kind of like this cream beige color, which is called Desert Sand, but a gray would be nice as well, depending on how you want your tree to look. I'm just going to lightly brush this desert sand right over the brown. And I have like hardly anything on my brush. It does not need much at all. I don't want to completely cover that brown. I just want to add some highlights. So I want all three colors to show through. So this is where you have to be super careful and have barely anything on your brush for this. And you just want to lightly feather the paint on your piece. So just lightly feather your paintbrush. Adding highlights to your piece will just bring all those details forward to the front of your piece and make them all pop right out. Okay, I'm going to paint one more, and I'm doing the one with the carved initials. I've already added the black and brown, and I'm just going in with the highlights, the desert sand color, just to show you how those details just pop right out. And this is like adding the magic touch. This brings the magic to your piece. I've added a little bit. I'm going to add a little more. Always start with a little. You can always go in a little more. A little at a time is probably the best practice. I think this looks pretty good. I'm just giving it a check just to see if maybe I want to add some more somewhere else. But I think this looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to move on with a different type of greenery picks. These ones are going to be a little more simple. I purchased a pack of these. I think I have like 25. And I decided they would probably look better as hedges versus trees. So what I'm going to do is put a few of them together with 2 pieces and a few of them together with 3 pieces and see how many I can come up with. Now for the one that has 3 pieces, I did use hot glue, but I realized that I didn't need to use the glue at all. So there's no glue needed for these until I go and insert them into the ground. And then these will be lower to the ground and fill in some of that landscaping. This is super easy. I'm just taking the 2 picks and twisting them together. And I don't need to go down too far. I just need to go down enough where I can just glue them in place into the ground. So this is still a little bit longer than I need, but it's better to have a little extra than not enough because I can cut them down. So I'm going to take 3 pieces and do the same thing, making sure they're all lined up evenly around the bottom and just twist the picks together. I'm not going to be adding clay to these. I'm going to leave them as is, but I am going to add a little bit of color to these. This is the darkest green that I have. It's called Campground. And I'm just going to tone down the green that is already on here. I'm not going to cover up all of this lighter green. I want it to have a little bit of dimension to it. So I'm just throwing on this darker green all around. I'm not even being specific about this. I'm just covering it up till I think it looks good, leaving some of that lighter green behind. I like the two tones. It gives it a little more depth and detail, and like maybe the light is hitting it from different angles and showing a lighter green. I just feel like it looks a little more realistic than just one solid color. And there really wasn't much that I can come up with to do to these. So I think that this definitely improves their look. So I'm going to leave that as is and install them. Now, for that last pick that I have that I used for the trees, I'm going to cut this down and see if I can make a couple bushes with it. I didn't want to just set it aside and not use it. I feel like I could use it in a way that can still fill up some of the landscape. So I'm not really quite sure at this time what I'm doing. I just began by cutting the piece into two and just playing around with it. So I did come up with a way, and I decided to take the pieces off and then just glue them in a cluster on part of the branch. This one I created a little nest, kind of like a bird's nest. And I know birds probably wouldn't nest in such a low space due to predators, but I don't know. Maybe since it's a pet cemetery, they feel safe enough to do so. Okay, so here's the final view at the trees that I made. These were super fun, and I know I said I was going to try different techniques, but I don't want to. I think I'm going to stick with this technique and just use different greenery picks. So I'm going to see what else I have and what I can dig up. And here are the hedges that I made. I was able to create 10 hedges. I got 5 with 2 pieces and 5 with 3 pieces. Now it's time to put some of these pieces into the ground. Okay, tiny friends, I am out of time, and it's very easy to get carried away with this landscaping. I'm trying not to go too far into the midsection, so I stopped myself so I can just try and focus on the front section. Um, I hope you all have enjoyed this episode today, and if you have, please click that like button and give it a thumbs up. Let me know what you thought in the comments below about these easy trees. I am really loving the way this is beginning to look as I'm adding more landscaping to it. It's got a whole nother look to it now, and I'm excited to continue on and get this section finished up. So I like to thank those of you that have joined in to watch this project. I hope you are enjoying it so far and how it's evolving, and that you continue to tune in as I go along. If this is your first time tuning into this project and you want to catch up to see how I got to this point, just click on the playlist in the description box below. If you've liked what you've seen today, please subscribe to my channel and click the top bell notification button to be notified every time I upload a new project so you don't miss out. So, as always, I'd like to thank everybody for subscribing and welcome to all my new subscribers. Thank you all so much for your support. And until next time, tiny friends, I hope you all have a lovely day, and I will see you all on the mini side. Bye bye.